Don't serve anything to that old woman. Let her sit there quietly, as always." Those words, spoken loud and clear by my daughter-in-law Danielle's, pierced through the room like a sharp knife while I stood there with an empty plate at my own son's 35th birthday party. My name is Mary. I am 68 years old, and after working my entire life as a widowed mother to give my son Robert a better future, I became nothing but an invisible piece of old furniture to them. But what they didn't know was that behind my silent tears, I had discovered a devastating secret they were hiding from me, a cruel financial betrayal involving the very business I built with my own bare hands. I decided right then that I wasn't going to stay quiet, and they were going to have to beg for my forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly what I found and how I fought back, please make sure to subscribe to the channel to support stories like mine. Also, I would really love to know how far my words are reaching, so please tell me in the comments below which city you are watching this video from. I would love to read your answers. Now, let me take you back to how everything unfolded that heartbreaking night. Don't serve that old woman anything. Let her sit there quiet like always. Danielle's words pierced the living room like a sharp knife. I was standing in the doorway with an empty plate in my hands, watching how everyone turned to look at me. My daughter-in-law didn't even lower her voice. She said it just like that, loud, as if I wasn't there, as if I were a piece of old furniture that is in the way, but that you just can't throw out. The guests went quiet. Some looked the other way. Others pretended they didn't hear, but I heard. Each word stayed branded on my chest like hot iron. My name is Mary Sullivan, but all my life people have just called me Mary. I am 68 years old, and I was born right here in Savannah, Georgia. I worked from the time I was a young girl until a few years ago in my bakery downtown near the historic square. I was widowed very young, and I raised my son Robert all by myself. My whole life was hard work, calloused hands, cold early mornings, but I did it with pride because it was for my son, to give him a better future. Before I go on telling you what happened that day, let me ask you something. I would really love it if you told me in the comments what city you are watching this video from. I want to know how far these words reach, how far my story goes. Would you do me that favor? Write your city down below. Truly, I would love to read your answers. The party was Robert's birthday. My son was turning 35. The house was full of people, music, colorful balloons, and food on the big dining room table. Danielle had invited her friends, Robert's co-workers, and her own family. Everyone was laughing, chatting, toasting. I arrived on time, as always. I knocked on the door and nobody answered. I knocked again. Nothing. Finally, I pushed it open slowly and walked in. Nobody greeted me, not Robert, not Danielle, not my grandkids, as if I were invisible. I stood there near the door, not really knowing what to do. I saw Robert on the other side of the living room, laughing with his friends with a beer in his hand. He looked happy. Danielle was in the center of everything, wearing her new dress, all dolled up like she was going to a wedding, organizing everyone, telling them where to sit, what to eat. She was glowing. That's Danielle for you. She always has to be the center of attention. My grandkids, Sophie and Matthew, were running among the adults, playing with other children. They didn't even turn to look at me. I thought about walking up to Robert, giving him a hug, wishing him a happy birthday, but something stopped me. I don't know if it was fear or pride, but I just stayed there observing. Then, one of Danielle's friends approached me, a young woman I didn't know. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" she asked politely. I smiled and told her yes, a little glass of water would be fine. The young woman went to the kitchen. I stayed standing there, alone. That was when I heard Danielle's voice from the kitchen. The door was cracked open and her voice came through crystal clear. "Don't serve that old woman anything. Let her sit there quiet like always." The young woman didn't say anything. Neither did I. I just felt a knot form in my throat, like the floor was moving beneath my feet. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to cry. Not there. Not in front of everyone. The young woman came out of the kitchen without the glass of water, her face bright red, without looking at me. She walked right past me and got lost in the crowd. I stood there with my empty plate in my hands, not knowing what to do. I thought about leaving. I thought about walking out that door and never coming back. But something inside me said no, to stay, that this wasn't going to end like this. Danielle came out of the kitchen with a tray full of appetizers. She passed right by me without looking at me, without saying a word, as if I didn't exist. I sat down on a chair that was shoved in a corner of the living room, far from everyone. From there, I saw everything. I saw how Danielle hugged Robert, how she kissed him on the cheek, how she whispered something in his ear and they both laughed. I saw how they cut the cake, how everyone sang happy birthday, how the kids blew out the candles with Robert. I didn't move from my chair. Nobody offered me cake. Nobody asked if I wanted to eat something. Nobody came over to chat with me. It was as if I were a ghost, as if I wasn't even there. And the worst part of all was that Robert, my son, the boy I raised alone, the one I gave everything to, didn't even turn to look at me a single time. Hours passed and he stayed right there with his friends, with his wife, with his kids, but without his mother. When it started to get dark and people began to leave, I also got up from my chair. I walked toward the door without saying goodbye. Nobody noticed I was leaving. Nobody said, "Have a good evening, Miss Mary," or "Thanks for coming." Nothing. I walked out to the street and the cool night air hit my face. I walked slowly toward the city bus stop. My legs hurt. My back hurt. But my heart hurt the most. On the bus ride back, I rode alone in the back seat. Through the window, I watched the lights of Savannah, the historic streets I've known my whole life, the colonial houses, the churches, the city that watched me be born and grow up. And I started to think about everything, about how I ended up here, about what I did wrong for my own son to treat me like this, about why Danielle hated me so much. And the more I thought, the clearer I saw that something wasn't right, that there were things that didn't add up, things I had let slide, that I had ignored because I didn't want to cause problems. But that night, on that empty bus, with a broken heart and my dignity trampled on, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay quiet. I wasn't going to keep being the invisible little old lady who was just in the way. I was going to do something. I didn't know what yet, but I was going to do something. And I promise you one thing, Danielle was going to have to beg me for forgiveness on her knees. I arrived at the little room where I was living, a tiny place I rented a few months ago after, well, I'll tell you about that later. The important thing is that night, before going to bed, I took an old rusty key out of my purse. I watched it shine under the light bulb. I smiled. Danielle didn't know what I knew. Robert didn't either. Nobody knew, and that was going to change everything. I couldn't sleep that night. I laid in my little bed, staring at the ceiling, turning everything over and over in my head. The old key was on the nightstand, shining with the light coming in through the window from the street. Every time I looked at it, I felt something in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was something else. It was like rage mixed with sadness, but also with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. I got up when the sun started to rise, like I always do. Even though I don't work at the bakery anymore, my body still wakes up at 5 inches the morning. Those are years of habit that don't just fade away. I made myself a cup of coffee with hot water on my small 2-burner stove and sat on the only chair I have in this little room. From there, I could see my whole world, a bed, a small table, an old wardrobe that my good friend Carol gave me, and a cardboard box under the bed. In that box, I keep the most important things I own, the only things I have left. I drank my coffee slowly, feeling how the hot liquid woke me up inside. Outside, you could already hear the street noises, the cars, people going to work, dogs barking. Savannah wakes up early. It's always been that way. This city doesn't change, even if you change, or even if they change you. I've been living in this room for 6 months. 6 months since Danielle told me it was better if I found my own place. Mother-in-law, it's just that the house is getting too small. The kids need their space. You understand, right? She said it just like that, with that sweet voice she uses when she wants to get something. Robert was standing right behind her, without saying a word, just nodding his head like a puppet. My son, my Robert, the boy I carried in my arms when he cried at night, the one I nursed back to health when he got sick, the one I provided for with the sweat of my brow. That same Robert looked at me like I was a burden. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I just said yes, that I understood, that I would find something soon. Danielle smiled, relieved. It's only for a while, mother-in-law. just while we get things arranged better. Lies. I knew they were lies, but I didn't say anything. I gathered my few belongings in 2 bags and I left. Carol, my lifelong friend, helped me find this little room. It's small, it's in an old boarding house near the market, but it's mine. Here, nobody makes me feel like I'm in the way. What Danielle doesn't know, what Robert doesn't know either, is that I am no fool. Old, yes, but not a fool. 40 years of working in my bakery taught me a lot of things. They taught me to keep records, to save, to have my papers in order, to not trust pretty words, and above all, they taught me to protect what is mine. I finished my coffee and pulled the box out from under the bed. I put it on my lap and opened it slowly. Inside there were papers, a lot of papers, old documents, some yellowed, others newer. There were photos too, photos of when Robert was a boy, of when I opened my bakery, of my late husband, but the most important thing was all the way at the bottom, in a thick manila envelope. I took it out carefully and placed it on the small table next to the key. That envelope contained something that could change everything, something I saved 3 years ago. When I still lived with Robert and Danielle, when I still thought we were a family. Something I found by chance one afternoon when I was cleaning Robert's study. Papers he had left on his desk. Papers I saw accidentally, but that my instinct told me to keep. I made copies. I hid them. I never said a word. At that moment, I didn't fully understand what those papers meant. I just knew something wasn't right, that there were numbers that didn't add up, that there was a name that showed up a lot. Danielle Cortez de Mendez, my daughter-in-law, and there was another name too. Savannah Real Estate Group, and addresses. An address I knew very well because it was the address of my bakery downtown, the business I handed over to Robert 3 years ago so he could manage it. I touched the envelope with trembling fingers. I still didn't know what I was going to do with this. But I knew I had to do something. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep being invisible, being humiliated, being treated like trash by my own family. The Mary who worked 40 years without rest, the Mary who raised a son alone, the Mary who built something from nothing, that Mary wasn't going to stay quiet. I got dressed in my most decent clothes, a blue dress I saved for important occasions, and I left the room. I walked through the streets of Savannah with the envelope tucked under my arm. People greeted me, the vendors at the market, the neighbors, Mr. Henderson from the butcher shop. "Good morning, Miss Mary. How are you doing today?" I smiled and answered, but my mind was somewhere else. I reached the First Presbyterian Church, the church I went to every Sunday, where I baptized Robert, where I prayed for him when he was little. I sat in one of the pews at the back. There were few people at that hour, just some older ladies praying and Reverend Michael arranging some flowers at the altar. I stayed there for a while looking at the stained glass, the lit candles, feeling that peace you only feel in old churches. Reverend Michael saw me and walked over. "Miss Mary, what a miracle seeing you here on a weekday." I smiled at him. Reverend Michael has known me for years. He was the one who gave Robert his first communion. "Good morning, Reverend. I came to ask for some advice." He sat next to me in his black suit, his wrinkled hands crossed on his lap. "Tell me, my child, what brings you here?" And right there, on that cold church pew, I told him everything. I told him about the party, about Danielle's words, about how they treated me, about how Robert had kicked me out of his house. I told him about the envelope I had under my arm, about the papers I found, about the old key I was holding on to. Reverend Michael listened to me in silence, without interrupting, just nodding from time to time. When I finished talking, he took a deep breath. "Miss Mary, you know I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. The truth always comes to light, always. And when it does, there are those who get burned by it." He looked me straight in the eyes. "You are not the type to stay quiet. You never have been. Don't start now." His words gave me the push I needed. I walked out of the church with a firmer step. I knew exactly where I had to go. I walked through downtown until I reached an old 2-story building with a worn-out sign that read Arthur Sterling, Attorney at Law. I walked up the stairs slowly, taking a deep breath on every step. I knocked on the door and a deep voice told me to come in. Mr. Sterling was sitting behind his desk, which was covered in papers and books. He looked up, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Miss Mary, how many years has it been?" He stood up and gave me a hug. Mr. Sterling and my late husband had been friends in their youth. He always had a soft spot for me. "Sterling, I need your help," I told him, and I placed the manila envelope on his desk. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, "Have a seat, Miss Mary. Tell me everything." Mr. Sterling opened the envelope carefully, like someone opening something sacred. He took the papers out one by one and spread them out on his desk. I stayed seated in the chair across from him with my hands tightly gripping my purse, feeling my heart beating fast. I had waited 3 years to show this to someone. 3 years keeping a secret that weighed on my chest like a boulder. Mr. Sterling put on his glasses and started reading. His eyes darted from one paper to another, up and down, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. Suddenly, he stopped on one of the documents and held it up to see it better against the light coming through the window. "Good Lord, Miss Mary," he said in a low voice. "Where did you get this?" "I found them 3 years ago," I answered. I was cleaning Robert's study. He had left those papers on the desk. I didn't want to stick my nose where it didn't belong, but I saw my name. I saw the address of my bakery, and something told me it wasn't right. My voice was trembling a little. I made copies at Mr. Miller's print shop without anyone knowing. I put the originals back where they were. Nobody ever knew I saw them. Mr. Sterling kept reading in silence. Several minutes passed. I only heard the tick-tock of the wall clock and the rustle of the papers when he turned them. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me seriously. "Miss Mary, do you know what these documents say?" I shook my head. I know something isn't right. I know Danielle's name shows up a lot, and I know it has to do with my business, but I don't really understand what it is. Mr. Sterling gathered all the papers and arranged them in a neat pile. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with those tired eyes of an old man who has seen a lot in life. "What you have here, Miss Mary, is evidence that your daughter-in-law and your son sold your bakery 2 years ago. They sold it to a real estate group for a very good price. A very good price." He paused. "But the money from that sale never reached your hands, did it?" I felt like someone had dumped freezing water over my head. "What are you saying, Mr. Sterling? What do you mean they sold my business?" My voice came out shaky, almost like a muffled scream. "Robert told me the business was still open, that he was managing it. I walked by there about a year ago and it was closed, but he told me it was only temporary, that they were doing repairs." "Lies," Mr. Sterling said bluntly. "The business was sold 2 years ago. Here is the sales contract, and look at this." He showed me a paper. "This is the signature. This signature is yours." I leaned in to look. And it was a page with a lot of numbers in fine print, and at the bottom, a signature. A signature that looked like mine, but wasn't mine. "No," I said, feeling my voice break. "That's not my signature. I never signed anything. I never authorized any sale." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. This means someone forged your signature, Miss Mary, and that someone had access to your personal documents, to your ID, to your paperwork." He stared at me. "Who had access to those things when you lived with them?" I didn't need to think about it much. Danielle. She handled everything in the house. The bills, the paperwork, the documents. Robert let her do everything. He said she was very good with numbers, that she had studied accounting. I covered my mouth with my hand. My God, she did this. She forged my signature. "It looks like it," Mr. Sterling said. "And there's more. According to these documents, the money from the sale was deposited into a bank account under your son Robert's name. But look at the contact address listed right here." He pointed with his finger. "This is the address of the new house where they live now. The big house they bought 2 years ago." Everything started to click in my head like puzzle pieces. The new house, the expensive furniture, Danielle's new car, the trips they took every year. All of that came from the money from my business. From the business I built with my own hands, with my sweat, working from before the sun came up until after it went down. And they took it from me, they robbed me, and then they threw me out of their house like I was a burden. "What can I do, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, feeling the tears starting to sting my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "Can I get anything back? Can I make them pay for this?" Mr. Sterling stood up and walked over to the window. He stood there looking at the street with his hands in his pockets. I can dig deeper. I can get the bank records, the original deeds, everything we need. With what you brought, we already have plenty, but we need more to build a solid case. He turned back to me. This isn't going to be easy, Miss Mary. You are going to have to face your son. It's going to hurt. It already hurts, I told him. It's been hurting for a long time, but I can't stay quiet. Not after what they did to me. Mr. Sterling nodded. All right then, we'll get started. But I need you to get me something else. I need you to look for any document you might have kept from the bakery, old deeds, receipts, anything that proves that business was yours. Do you have anything like that? I remembered the old key I kept in my room. I have a key, I told him, a key to the storage unit in the back of the bakery. I used to keep important documents in a filing cabinet back there. I don't know if it's still there, but I can go check. Do it, Mr. Sterling told me, but be careful. If Danielle and Robert realize you're investigating, they might destroy evidence. They could make things much more difficult. He took my hands. Trust me, Miss Mary. We are going to get justice, but you have to be patient. I left Mr. Sterling's office with my heart racing, but with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I walked back to my little room, thinking about everything. About the storage unit, about the key, about the documents that maybe were still locked away in there, about how I was going to get in without anyone seeing me. The bakery was downtown, on a street that was more commercial now than before. If the real estate group had bought it, they surely had other plans for that place already. But the storage unit in the back, that old little shed that almost nobody knew about, maybe it was still intact. Maybe nobody had gone in there. Maybe my documents were still there waiting for me. That night, lying in bed, I looked at the rusty key on the nightstand. Tomorrow I would go. Tomorrow I would go into that storage unit and find what I needed. And if I found what I expected to find, Danielle and Robert were going to have a lot of explaining to do. I waited until it got dark. I didn't want to go during the day. I didn't want anyone to see me going into the storage unit. In Savannah, everyone knows everyone. People talk, and I couldn't risk someone gossiping to Robert or Danielle. So I waited. I put on dark clothes, an old jacket, and my most comfortable sneakers. I put the key in my pocket and a small flashlight that Carol lent me when I told her I needed to check on some things in a place without power. Are you sure you want to go alone, Mary? Carol asked me with a worried look. She knew a little bit about what was going on. Not everything, but something. Can I go with you? No, Carol, it's something I have to do alone, I told her. But thank you. If I'm not back in 2 hours, call my cell phone. I left when the streets were already dark. It was a Tuesday night, and downtown was quieter than usual. I walked slowly along the cobblestone sidewalks, being careful not to trip. I don't have the agility I used to, and the last thing I needed was to fall and break something. I passed through the main square, almost empty, just some tourists taking pictures in front of the illuminated monuments. Nobody paid me any mind. A little old lady walking alone doesn't draw attention. I reached the street where my bakery was, or where it used to be. The storefront now had its windows covered with newspaper and a large sign that read, "Coming soon, Savannah Boutique Coffee Shop." I felt a sting in my chest seeing it. My bakery, the place where I spent 40 years of my life, was going to become a coffee shop for tourists. They didn't even respect what it had been. They were going to erase it as if it had never existed. I took a deep breath and kept walking. The storage unit wasn't right there in the front. It was in the back, in a narrow alleyway that almost nobody used. I had to walk to the corner and go around. The alley was dark. There was only a yellowish light flickering on a pole. My footsteps echoed against the brick walls. I felt my heart beating in my ears. I reached the very back of the alley, and there it was, the old rusty metal door of the storage unit. It looked the same as it did 3 years ago. The same as always, with the same scratches, the same peeling paint, the same heavy padlock. I took the key out of my pocket with trembling hands and slipped it into the padlock. For a moment I thought it wasn't going to work, that after so much time the lock would be jammed or that they would have changed it. But the key turned. The padlock popped open with a loud click that sounded like thunder in the dead of night. I pushed the door and it creaked horribly. I froze, waiting, listening. Nothing, just the distant sound of cars on the main street. I walked in and closed the door behind me. I turned on the flashlight, and the beam of light sliced through the darkness. The room smelled of dampness and time. There were cobwebs in the corners and dust over everything, but it was just as I remembered it. The old boxes stacked against the wall, the wooden boards leaning against them, the gray metal filing cabinet in the back. It was still there. I walked over to it, shining the light on my path, being careful not to trip over the clutter on the floor. The filing cabinet had 3 drawers. I tried to pull them open, but they were locked. Of course, I was always careful with my paperwork, but the key to the filing cabinet, where was it? I thought and thought. I had it on a keychain along with other keys. A keychain I kept in my room when I lived with Robert and Danielle. A keychain I hadn't seen again since I left that house. I felt a knot in my stomach. Danielle. She had rummaged through my things when she kicked me out of the house. She said it was to help me pack. She surely found the keychain. She surely threw it away, or hid it, or who knows what she did with it. Whatever, I wasn't going to give up just like that. I looked at the filing cabinet with the beam of the flashlight. It was an old one, from the good old days. The lock didn't look very strong. I dug around through the junk in the storage unit until I found a rusty screwdriver. I went back to the cabinet and shoved the screwdriver into the lock of the top drawer. I pushed, I forced it, I twisted. Nothing. I tried again. One more time. Sweat was rolling down my forehead, despite the chill of the night. And then, crack. Something snapped inside the lock. The drawer shifted a little. I yanked it hard, and it slid open. Inside there were folders, lots of yellow folders full of papers. I took them out carefully and set them on the floor. I shined the light on the handwritten titles on each folder. Suppliers 2018, invoices 2019, expenses 2020, and all the way at the back, a folder thicker than the rest. I pulled it out and read what was written on the cover. Property deeds. My hands shook as I opened it. There they were, the original deeds to the bakery, the document that proved that business had been mine, bought with my money, registered in my name from the very beginning. My full name, Mary Sullivan, widow. The date, the 15th of August, 1985. My original signature, my fingerprint, it was all there. There were also receipts, property tax receipts from every year, utility bills, proof that I had kept that business running for 40 years. It was the perfect evidence, the proof that what Robert and Danielle had done was theft, a total fraud. I stuffed everything into a plastic bag I found in the unit. I pushed the drawer shut as best I could and made sure to leave everything more or less the way it was. I didn't want anyone to notice I had broken in. I turned off the flashlight, stepped out of the unit, closed the door, and snapped the padlock back on. I walked quickly back down the alley, clutching the bag against my chest. Every shadow felt threatening, every noise made me jump, but I made it back to the main street without any problems. I was almost safe. Then I heard a voice behind me. Miss Mary. My blood ran cold. I turned around slowly. It was Robert. My son was standing right there on the sidewalk a few yards away from me, with his hands shoved in his jacket pockets. The streetlight hit his face, and I could see his surprised expression. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I squeezed the plastic bag with the documents tightly against me, trying to hide it as best I could. Robert, I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. What a surprise seeing you out here. He took a slow step toward me. I was just thinking the same thing. What are you doing downtown at this hour, Mom? It's late. His tone wasn't out of concern. It was more like suspicion. He looked me up and down, as if trying to uncover something. I came to see a friend, I lied quickly. You know, one of the ladies I met when I ran the bakery lives around here. I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff as wood. And what are you doing around here? Robert nodded his head backward. I came to check on the property. The real estate guys called me. They say they're having trouble with some permits for the new coffee shop. He went quiet for a moment, staring right at me. Quite a coincidence running into you right here, isn't it? Yes, Quite a coincidence, I said, feeling the sweat rolling down my back. Well, I'm heading out. It's getting late and the last bus comes soon. I started to step away, but Robert caught me by the arm. Not hard, but firmly. Wait, what do you have there? He was staring at the plastic bag I was clutching. Nothing. Things from my friend. She let me borrow some magazines. The lies were getting harder to tell. I could feel my voice quivering. Robert looked me in the eyes, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before, or maybe it had always been there and I just didn't want to see it. It was coldness, distrust, as if I were a stranger and not the mother who raised him. Magazines, he said, clearly not believing me. You came out at this hour for magazines. Yes, I said, pulling my arm out of his grip. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get going. I started walking briskly down the sidewalk. I heard his footsteps right behind me. Mom, wait! His voice sounded louder. Now I just kept walking, practically jogging. I couldn't let him catch up to me. I couldn't let him see what I had in the bag. Mom! I turned the corner and ducked down another street. There were more people there, some shops still open, a guy selling hot dogs at his cart. I hid behind the cart, crouching down a bit. The vendor gave me a weird look, but he didn't say anything. I watched Robert walk past on the main street, scanning the area with his eyes. He kept walking. He didn't see me. I waited there for a few minutes, breathing heavily, feeling my knees aching from crouching down. When I couldn't see Robert anywhere, I came out of my hiding spot. The hot dog vendor asked if I was okay. Yes, thank you, I told him, and I continued on my way, taking a different route, looping through streets I knew well until I finally made it to the bus stop. I got on the very first bus that came by and sat all the way in the back, still hugging my bag. The whole ride home, I kept looking over my shoulder, checking to make sure Robert hadn't followed me, but I didn't see him. I got to my little room and locked the door with the key, the deadbolt, everything. I sat on the bed trembling, not from the cold but from pure fear. It had been close. Way too close. If Robert had seen the documents, if he had known what I was carrying, everything would have been ruined, but he didn't see them. I was safe. For now. I pulled the papers out of the bag and spread them across the bed. The deeds, the receipts, it was all there. It was the proof I needed. Tomorrow I would take them to Mr. Sterling. He would know what to do with this, how to use it, how to make Robert and Danielle pay for what they did. But something was bothering me. Robert had seen me near the building. He was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid. He was going to get suspicious. He was going to wonder what I was doing around there, and if he told Danielle, she was going to start connecting the dots. They knew there was a storage unit in the back. Maybe they didn't remember that I had the key, but they could go check. They could realize that someone had forced open the filing cabinet. I got up and looked for a safe place to hide the documents. Under the bed, no. Not in the wardrobe either. Finally, I shoved them deep inside a bag of dry beans in my little kitchenette. Nobody would look there. Then I made myself some chamomile tea to calm my nerves and sat back down on the bed. My cell phone buzzed. It was a text message from Robert. I opened it with shaking hands. Mom, we need to talk. Danielle and I want to see you tomorrow. Come to the house at 3. It's important. I read the message several times. Important. Important for what? What did they want now? Were they suspecting something? Or was it something else? I didn't reply to the message. I turned off the phone and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I spent the whole night with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what was coming tomorrow. At 3 inches the afternoon, I would have to be face to face with them, with Robert, with Danielle, the woman who had humiliated me at the party, the woman who had stolen my business, the woman who hated me, and I would have to pretend that I didn't know anything. I would have to smile. I would have to listen to whatever they had to say. But on the inside, I already knew the truth. And the truth was a sharpened blade that sooner or later I was going to use, even if I still didn't know how or when. By 2:30 inches the afternoon, I was ready. I put on my gray dress, the one I use for serious occasions, and pulled my hair back into a bun. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall and almost didn't recognize myself. I had deep bags under my eyes from not sleeping. My face looked thinner, but my eyes, those were shining differently. They were no longer the tired eyes of a defeated old woman. They were the eyes of someone who knows something, of someone holding a secret. Before leaving, I went to the kitchenette and pulled the documents out of the bag of beans. I slipped them into my large handbag, that canvas tote I always carry around. I wasn't planning on showing them to Robert and Danielle, but I wanted to keep them close. They gave me strength. They were my invisible shield. I arrived at the house right at 3 o'clock. I rang the doorbell and waited. I heard footsteps on the other side, and the door swung open. It was Danielle. She was wearing yoga pants and a fitted top, her hair down, her makeup done as if she were going out to a party, even though she was in her own house. She looked me up and down with that fake smile I also knew too well. "Mother-in-law, so punctual," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Robert is in the living room, waiting for you." I walked in, and the smell of the house brought back memories, not good ones. I remembered the months I lived there, feeling invisible, feeling like a nuisance. I walked into the living room, and there was Robert, sitting on the large sofa with a laptop on his knees. When he saw me, he closed the computer and set it aside. "Sit down, Mom," he told me, pointing to the armchair across from him. "No, hello. No, how are you? Just sit down." I sat slowly, placing my bag on the floor right by my feet. Danielle sat next to Robert, pressing right up against him like she was marking her territory. There was an awkward silence. I waited. I wasn't going to be the first one to speak. Let them say whatever they needed to say. Robert cleared his throat. "Mom, I asked you to come over because we need to talk about something important." He paused. "We need to talk about money." There it was, money. It was always about money with them. "What about money?" I asked with a calm voice. Danielle was the one who answered. "Oh, mother-in-law, it's just that things are really tight right now. Robert has a lot of expenses with the new business, the house, the kids, everything is so expensive." She spoke with that syrupy voice she used when she wanted to manipulate someone. "And, well, we thought that maybe you could help us out a little bit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Help them out." I almost burst out laughing, but I held it in. "Danielle, I live in a 10 by 10 room. I barely have enough to eat. How do you think I'm going to help you out?" Robert leaned forward. "Mom, I know you saved money from the bakery. I know you have savings. Don't play dumb." His tone was accusatory, as if I were the one hiding something. "You were always good at saving. I'm sure you have a nest egg tucked away." I felt my blood boil. They had the nerve to ask me for money. They, who had stolen my business. They, who lived in this big house bought with my sweat, and they still wanted more. "I don't have anything," I said firmly. "I swear to you, everything I had went to paying rent for the room, food, my medications. It wasn't a complete lie. I did have a little bit saved up, but it was my money, the only tiny cushion I had left for emergencies." Danielle let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, mother-in-law, don't be like that. It's for your own son, for your grandkids. Don't you want Sophie and Matthew to have a good future?" "Of course I do," I said, feeling my voice tremble with anger. "But I have no way to help you." "I'm sorry." Robert stood up from the sofa abruptly. "It's always the same with you, Mom. Always so selfish." He pointed a finger at me. "You spent my entire childhood telling me that family is the most important thing, that you have to help your own. And now when I need you, you act like you don't know what I'm talking about." His words hurt worse than any physical blow. My own son calling me selfish. My son, the one I had sacrificed everything for. "Robert," I said, standing up as well, "I gave you everything I could. I worked 40 years so you could have what I never had. I never left you without." "And the business?" Danielle asked, standing up too. "The business you passed down to Robert doesn't count as anything? That business that you claimed was worth so much?" There was the trap. They wanted me to talk about the business. They wanted to see if I knew something. I looked at the two of them standing there like judges, and in that moment, I understood everything. The meeting last night, Robert seeing me near the property. This wasn't a coincidence. They had called me here to test me, to see if I was suspicious about the sale. "I gave that business to Robert so he could manage it," I said, choosing my words carefully. "So it could be his livelihood, not so you could throw it in my face." "Well, that business doesn't exist anymore, mother-in-law," Danielle said, crossing her arms. "It went under years ago, it just wasn't making a profit." We had to liquidate everything, and it barely covered the debts. She looked me dead in the eyes. So don't come in here acting like you gave Robert something valuable. You handed him a problem. Liar! Shameless liar! But I didn't say a thing. I just grabbed my bag from the floor and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Robert asked. I'm leaving, I said, without turning around. I have nothing else to do here. Mom, we're not done talking. I opened the door and walked out. Danielle yelled something behind my back, but I didn't listen to what it was. I walked fast down the street until I was far away from that house, until I couldn't hold it in anymore and had to sit down on a bench at the bus stop. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, but I also felt something else. I felt rage, pure rage. I took out my cell phone and dialed Mr. Sterling's number. Mr. Sterling, I said when he answered. I have the documents, all of them, and I need us to do something right now. I can't wait any longer. Come to my office first thing tomorrow morning, he told me, and bring everything you have. It's time to start moving the pieces. I hung up and sat there watching the cars go by. The time for hiding was over. The time for putting up with humiliation was over. It was time to strike back. I arrived at Mr. Sterling's office at 8 inches the morning. He was already there with his steaming coffee and his glasses on, waiting for me. Across his desk, he had laid out all the papers I had given him before, plus other new documents he had managed to get. He looked serious, focused, like a general planning for battle. Have a seat, Miss Mary, he said. We have a lot to talk about. I took the documents from the storage unit out of my bag and placed them on the desk. Mr. Sterling picked them up carefully, like they were solid gold. He went through them one by one, reading under his breath, making notes on a legal pad. Every now and then he would shake his head or let out a low whistle. This is perfect, he said finally. With these original deeds and the records I pulled from the county clerk, we have a rock-solid case. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Miss Mary, your daughter-in-law and your son committed fraud. They forged your signature, sold a property that didn't belong to them, and kept the money. That is a serious felony. I felt a lump in my throat. Hearing him say it like that, so clear, so direct, made everything more real. What can we do? I asked. Mr. Sterling clasped his hands on the desk. We have two paths. The first is going straight to the police, filing criminal charges. With this evidence, there would be an investigation and likely arrest warrants. That is the full legal route. He paused. The second path is more strategic. First, we confront them privately with the evidence. We give them a chance to fix things, return the money, pay the necessary damages, and sign the correct paperwork. If they don't accept, then we absolutely proceed with the full legal route. And which one do you recommend? I asked. That depends on what you want, Miss Mary. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his chair. If you want swift justice and want to see them pay behind bars, we file the charges. But I have to warn you, that process can take years, it is exhausting, and there is no guarantee you will recover your money anytime soon. He pointed to the papers. If what you want is to recover what is yours, and for them to learn a lesson without completely destroying your son's life, then we go with the private confrontation. First, we put the squeeze on them. We force them to negotiate. I thought about Robert, my son, the boy I had raised, that I had held in my arms, that I had sung to sleep. Yes, he had betrayed me. Yes, he had hurt me. But he was still my son. Did I really want to see him in prison? And then I thought about Danielle, about her cruel words, her fake smile, how she had manipulated me, robbed me, humiliated me. She didn't deserve my mercy. I want to confront them, I said finally. I want to look them in the face when they realize I know everything. I want them to feel the fear that I felt. And if they refuse to make things right, then yes, we take everything to the police. Mr. Sterling nodded. That sounds like a plan. Then let's do this. He grabbed a blank sheet of paper and started writing. First, I'm going to draft a document detailing all the findings, dates, amounts, irregularities, everything. Then I'm going to formally subpoena the bank for the statements regarding the sale. With a court order, I can get them fast. That will show us exactly where the money went. How long will that take? I asked. A week. 2 at the most, he replied. In the meantime, you must not say a word to Robert or Danielle. Nothing. Let them think everything is normal, that you are still the defenseless old lady they can just ignore. I nodded. I could do that. I could pretend a little longer. And one more thing, Mr. Sterling said. I need you to think if there is anyone else who can testify on your behalf. Someone who saw how the business operated, who knows you were the owner, who can confirm you never authorized a sale. I thought about the people I knew. There's Mr. Henderson from the butcher shop. He's known me for years. And Carol, my friend. And Reverend Michael knows about my situation too. I remembered someone else. And Mr. Miller at the print shop. He's the one who helped me make copies of the first documents I found. He knows something shady was going on. Perfect, Mr. Sterling said, writing down the names. I'm going to talk to each of them, take their informal statements. It all adds up. I felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was on my side, that I wasn't alone in this. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Thank you so much. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this. He waved a hand, brushing it off. Your husband was my friend, Miss Mary. And you are a good person. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. He stood up and offered me his hand. Besides, I don't like seeing people take advantage of the elderly. It makes my blood boil. I walked out of Mr. Sterling's office feeling lighter. I had a plan. I had a lawyer. I had evidence. I wasn't defenseless anymore. I walked through downtown with my head held higher, breathing the crisp morning air. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert. Mom, sorry about yesterday. Danielle and I were just stressed. Can we see each other this week? The kids are asking about you. I read the message twice. Now he remembered the kids. Now he wanted to see me. Danielle probably told him they went too far, that they needed to keep me happy just in case I actually did have money stashed away. I didn't answer. I dropped the phone in my purse and kept walking. Let them wait. Let them wonder what I was thinking. Let them worry a little. Because in 2 weeks, when Mr. Sterling had everything ready, they were going to find out that the little old lady they humiliated and robbed wasn't as helpless as they thought, and by then, it would be way too late for regrets. 12 days passed. 12 days where Robert sent me several texts that I ignored. 12 days where Danielle called me twice, leaving fake, sweet voicemails asking how I was doing. 12 days where I stood firm, quiet, waiting. Mr. Sterling worked fast. He got the court order, the bank statements, the witness affidavits. Everything was ready. On the 13th day, Mr. Sterling called me. Miss Mary, it's time. I have everything prepared. Let's formally summon them to my office as an attorney to clients. Tell them to come tomorrow at 4 inches the afternoon. And if they don't show up? I asked. They'll show up, he said with certainty. On the summons, I'm going to state that it's regarding urgent legal matters tied to an inherited property. That will pique their curiosity. They'll think maybe you're leaving them something else. You'll see. He was right, Robert replied to Mr. Sterling's message in less than an hour, confirming they would be there. Of course, greed never fails. The following afternoon, I dressed in my best clothes, the navy blue dress I saved for special occasions, my good shoes, a little powder on my face so I wouldn't look so washed out. Carol helped me with my hair. She put it up in an elegant bun. You look like a proper lady, Mary, she told me. You look like you're in charge. I arrived at Mr. Sterling's office half an hour early. He already had everything set up on his desk. Organized binders, documents marked with colored tabs, a small audio recorder. I'm going to record everything, he explained. Just in case things get ugly, we need a record of what's said in here. I sat in a chair next to the desk, not across from it. Mr. Sterling wanted Robert and Danielle to view me as part of the legal team, not as the accused. You don't say anything at first, he instructed me. Let me do the talking. I present the evidence. You only answer if I ask you something directly. Understood? Understood. I nodded. My heart was pounding. But it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. At exactly 4 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Sterling told them to come in. Robert and Danielle entered, him in a suit, like he just came from work. Her in a tight dress and heels, fully made up. When they saw me sitting there, they froze. "Mom," Robert said, "what are you doing here?" "Take a seat, please," Mr. Sterling said in a serious, professional tone. He pointed to the two chairs across the desk. Robert and Danielle sat down slowly, looking confused. She was glaring at me, eyes narrowed, trying to figure out what was going on. "Mr. Sterling turned on the recorder. "This meeting is being recorded for legal purposes. Today is November 14th, 2025. The time is 4 p.m. Present: Robert Sullivan, Danielle Sullivan, Mary Sullivan, and myself, Arthur Sterling, attorney at law." He looked at Robert and Danielle. "I called you here because there are severe legal matters that we need to resolve." "Legal matters?" Danielle asked. "What are you talking about, Mr. Sterling?" He opened the first binder. "I am talking about the fraud that the two of you committed 2 years ago when you illegally sold the commercial property located at 47 Broad Street, formerly known as Sullivan's Bakery, without the consent or knowledge of its rightful owner." He laid the original deeds on the desk. "These are the original records that prove Mary Sullivan is the sole owner of that property." Robert turned pale. Danielle clenched her jaw. That isn't true," Robert stammered. "My mom handed the business over to me. She signed everything. Mr. Sterling placed the sales contract on top of the deeds. Your mother did not sign this." He pointed at the forged signature. "Because we have analysis from handwriting experts that confirm this signature is a forgery. It does not match Miss Mary's authentic signature." The silence that followed was so heavy you could cut it with a knife. Danielle looked at Robert. Robert looked at the papers. Nobody spoke. "Furthermore, Mr. Sterling continued, I have here the bank statements showing that the proceeds from the sale, $850,000, were deposited into an account under Robert Sullivan's name." He laid the bank statements on top. "Money that was never remitted or reported to Miss Mary. Money you used to purchase your current residence, according to these deed records from the county clerk." Danielle exploded. "That is nobody's business. Robert is her son. He has a right to that money." "No," I spoke up. My voice came out firm and clear. Everyone turned to look at me. "He has no right to anything obtained through lies and theft. That business was mine. I built it and you stole it from me." "Mom, you were getting old," Robert yelled, standing up. "Someone had to make decisions. You couldn't manage anything anymore." "Old, but not stupid," I told him, staring right into him. "Old, but not blind. I knew something wasn't right. That's why I kept copies of everything. That's why I investigated. That's why I am sitting here today." Danielle stood up too. "This is ridiculous. Let's go." "Robert, we don't have to listen to this. If you leave this office without resolving this, Mr. Sterling said with a hardened voice, "tomorrow morning, first thing, I will file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. The two of you will go to prison, and believe me, with the evidence I have, you won't get out for years." That stopped them dead in their tracks. They stood there, looking at each other, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. "But, Mr. Sterling continued, if you sit down and we negotiate like civilized people, we can reach an agreement that keeps you out of jail. You return what was stolen, sign the correct documentation, and this remains a private matter." Robert slumped back into his chair. Danielle remained standing, shaking with rage. "How much?" she asked, her voice sharp as glass. "How much do you want, Mr.?" Sterling pulled out another document. "It is not a question of how much we want. It is a question of returning what you stole." And he began reading the list of demands we had prepared. Mr. Sterling read each point of the document slowly, clearly, letting each word drop like a hammer on Robert and Danielle. First, the immediate restitution of $850,000, the total amount of the fraudulent sale, plus accrued interest over the past 2 years, totaling $1 million. Danielle slapped a hand over her mouth. Second, the signing of legal affidavits acknowledging that the property was sold illegally and that Miss Mary never authorized said transaction. Third, a formal, written public apology to Miss Mary, acknowledging the fraud committed. "That's impossible," Danielle screamed. "We don't have that kind of money. We spent it on the house, the new business, everything." "Then you will sell," Mr. Sterling said, completely unfazed. "Or you will take out a loan or mortgage something. It is not my problem how you get the money. All I know is that you have 30 days to pay it in full, or we go to the police." Robert had his head buried in his hands. He wasn't saying a word, just breathing heavily. Danielle paced back and forth across the office like a caged animal. "This is abuse," she ranted. "It's extortion. You are extorting us." "Extortion is what you did to Miss Mary," Mr. Sterling replied. "I am merely seeking justice. If you prefer to let a judge decide, I will gladly file the complaint right now." Danielle spun around to face me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "This is all your fault, you meddling old bat. Why didn't you just die already? Why do you have to ruin everything?" Her words hurt. I won't deny it, but they didn't break me anymore. She no longer had power over me. "Danielle," I said, getting up from my chair and stepping toward her, "I never did anything wrong to you. I welcomed you into my home when you got married. I watched your children, I loved you like family, and you repaid me with betrayal, with humiliation, with theft." My voice cracked a little, but I kept going. "You threw me out of your house like I was garbage. You left me with nothing. And you still had the nerve to ask me for money. Because we thought you had it stashed away," she screamed. "Robert told me you always hoarded money, that you were cheap." "Danielle, shut up!" Robert finally yelled at her. He looked destroyed. "Enough! Don't say another word." But Danielle was out of control. "You know what? I'm going to say it all. Yes, selling the business was my idea. Yes, I forged your signature. And do you know why? Because that place was a dump that wasn't worth anything. Because you were washed up and someone had to make smart decisions. That money helped us move forward, to give your grandkids a better life." "By lying," I said. "By stealing. That is not the life I taught my son to live." Robert stood up, stumbling slightly. He walked toward me, and for a second, I thought he was going to hug me, but he just stood there, looking at me with glassy eyes. "Mom, I didn't want it to be like this," Danielle convinced me. "She told me it was for the best, that you would understand, that it was for our own good." "You were always weak, Robert," I told him, feeling my heart shatter. "You always let yourself be manipulated. But you are an adult. You made choices, and now you have to pay for them." "How much time do we have?" he asked in a defeated voice. 30 days, Mr. Sterling repeated. "If in 30 days you don't hand over the full amount plus the signed documents, I proceed with legal action, no exceptions." Danielle let out a bitter laugh. 30 days. And where are we supposed to pull that money from? The house is in both our names. We can't just sell it overnight. The new business is barely off the ground. We have no liquid assets. "That is not my problem," I said. "You found a way to rob me. Now find a way to pay me back what is mine." Robert dropped back into the chair again. He looked totally defeated, gray, as if he had aged 10 years in half an hour. "And if we can't, are you really going to put us in jail, Mom?" I looked him in the eyes. The same eyes I saw open for the first time when he was born. The same eyes that looked at me with love when he was a little boy. Now I only saw fear and guilt. "Robert, you made the decision to rob me. Now I am making the decision to take back what is mine. And yes, if you don't return my money, I am turning you in. You are my son. But I am not going to let you keep abusing me." "Mr. Sterling pulled out 2 copies of the demand letter and handed them over. "Read it carefully. Consult your own attorney if you'd like. But I warn you, the clock starts today. 30 days, not one more." Robert took the papers with a trembling hand. Danielle snatched them angrily and crumpled the edges. "This isn't over," she muttered. "We're going to fight this." "Perfect, Mr. Sterling said. "Then we'll see you in court. But let me warn you, Mrs. Sullivan. I have more than enough evidence to sink you both, and trust me, a judge is not going to be nearly as generous as what we are offering here." They walked out of the office without saying goodbye, without looking back. I heard their footsteps hurrying down the stairs, arguing with each other. When they were gone, I stood there, trembling. Mr. Sterling walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did very well, Miss Mary. You were strong." "I don't feel strong," I said, wiping away a tear that had managed to escape. "I feel destroyed." "That's normal," he said. "Confronting family always hurts, but you did the right thing, the just thing." I nodded. I knew he was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I walked out of the office right as it was getting dark. I strolled through the streets of Savannah, watching the lights turn on in the historic homes, listening to the laughter of families eating dinner together, and I wondered if someday I would have that again. A family that truly loved me. But for now, I had something more important. I had my dignity back. 30 days feels like an eternity when you're waiting for justice, but at the same time, they pass in the blink of an eye. Every sunrise was a reminder that the deadline was approaching, that the truth could no longer be swept under the rug. Mr. Sterling always told me the same thing. Patience, Miss Mary. Dignity walks slowly, but it always arrives. I believed him, and every day I sat in my little chair in my room, staring at that rusty key on the table, the one that had given me back my courage. During the first few weeks, Robert sent me texts almost every day. "Mom, we're figuring out how to fix this. Give us time, I promise." Danielle, on the other hand, only sent one. "Don't think you won. This isn't over." I didn't answer her. I learned that silence is the most powerful response when the other person is looking for a war. On day 20, Mr. Sterling called me. "We have everything lined up. They haven't paid a dime, but the judge approved the preliminary lien on their property." My hands shook, not out of fear, but relief. "And what happens next?" I asked. "Now we summon them one last time. If they don't pay, we file the charges, and the lien goes into effect in 7 days. That night I didn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from that strange mix of sadness and strength you feel right before the end. I looked at the picture of Robert as a little boy, his face covered in flour in the bakery. I spoke to him softly, as if he could still hear me. "It's not revenge, my boy, it's justice. And sometimes justice is a teacher, too." The next day, I showed up at Mr. Sterling's office. Everything was ready, sealed folders, notarized documents, and a copy of the tape of Danielle's confession. When they walked in, I noticed they looked different. Danielle didn't have that same gleam in her eyes, and Robert's gaze was sunken, devoid of pride. They sat down in silence. Mr. Sterling didn't waste any time. The deadline expired yesterday. "According to our terms, we proceed with the criminal complaint and the property lien." Danielle interrupted him immediately. "Wait, we have a portion of the money." She pulled out a thick envelope. Mr. Sterling counted every bill, noted the exact figure, and signed a receipt. "This covers half. The other half must be wire transferred within 15 days. If it isn't, the process moves forward." Robert hung his head. "It will be done, Mr. Sterling." I just watched without saying a word. I didn't want glory. I just wanted the truth. Before leaving, Danielle looked at me coldly. "Are you happy now?" I stayed quiet for a few seconds and then replied, "No, dear. It's not about being happy. It's about respect, and that is earned with actions, not with words." She tried to snap back, but Robert grabbed her hand. "That's enough, Danny." For the first time, he was the one setting a boundary. When they left, Mr. Sterling handed me the paperwork in a blue folder. "With this, you have the title back in your name, and if they follow through with the final payment, we close the case. If not, we sink them legally." I nodded. "I don't want to see them in a cell, Mr. Sterling. I just want them to learn." He offered a tired smile. "That's already started, Miss Mary. Believe me." That afternoon, I walked down the cobblestone streets of Savannah. The air smelled of fresh-baked bread and old rain. I passed by my old bakery. The sign for the new coffee shop was still covered with newspaper. I stood there staring at it for a while. I didn't feel rage. I felt peace. Maybe something new will be born here, I thought. Maybe not a bakery, but a little storefront with my name on it where nobody tells me to stay quiet. When I got home, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Robert. "Mom, we will finish paying everything. Danielle went away for a few days with the kids. I know we hurt you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I understand. Thank you for not completely destroying us. I love you." I read the letter 3 times. I cried, but not out of pain, but out of relief. Sometimes a tiny crack is enough to let the light in. I tucked the letter away next to my recovered deeds. Then I went out to the courtyard of the boarding house and sat under the warm sun. Carol came by with a sweet roll and gave me a hug without asking anything. "Did you win, Mary?" she asked. "I didn't win," I answered. "I just put things exactly where they belong." That night, I made myself hot cocoa for the first time in a long while. I poured it into my favorite mug and laughed to myself. Old? Yes. But invisible? Never again. Justice didn't give me back the lost years or the tears, but it gave me back something much more valuable, my voice. And that is enough. That is where my story ends. But maybe another one is just beginning. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to me. Now, tell me, what city are you watching this video from? I want to read your answers in the comments.